Welcome back and welcome to day 3, our final day of the AHEAD Cloud Summit. I'm Tom Pullman. If you didn't have the opportunity to join us on day 1 and day 2, I'm with AHEAD and I'm your virtual MC for our 3-day summit. Yesterday we focused on platforms, and the day before that we focused on applications. Today is about ongoing operations. Again, optimizing those operations for scale in the enterprise. We'll start off today with AHEAD's Ben Varnum on proactively managing cost and compliance in a cloud world. Then we'll have a session featuring 2 more clients, United Airlines and Consumers Energy, with a session called What I Wish I Knew at the Beginning of Our Cloud Journey. After a break, we'll come back this afternoon with AHEAD's very own Johnny Hatch, and he'll take us through a session on observability in a cloud context, enterprise monitoring and analytics applied to public cloud. And then we're going to wrap up our summit with an important session on the keys to integrating ServiceNow with cloud, containers, and DevOps initiatives. So let's get going. I'll turn it over to AHEAD's Ben Varnum. Ben, take it away.
Thanks, Tom. Today I'm here to talk a little bit about day 2 ops and proactively managing cost and compliance in a cloud world. Before we get started, let's take a look at the agenda. First, we're going to start off with talking about the state of cloud adoption and the shared responsibility model in the cloud. Next, we're going to talk about cost optimization, followed by security and compliance, and we'll close out with a demo of the AHEAD CoPilot platform. Let's start with talking a little bit about cloud adoption. Through many of the projects we've been working on with clients, we've really had the opportunity to understand what's going on in the cloud. And we found 4 major challenges that they face during their cloud journey. First, there is a little bit of a burden of managing a cloud environment at scale. And sometimes that's taking away from the efficiency that clients expect to gain when they move to the cloud. Second, cloud is new, and the cloud skills are something that not every engineer has. So we find that a lot of people are taking time to upskill their staff, but that is something that isn't necessarily immediate. Those traditional support models from those big distributors and those big managing services organizations really don't give you the control over your cloud environment. And finally, there are some gaps in native provider tooling, and there needs to be some tools overlaid into your cloud environment to help make sure that it's secure. As a part of this conversation, we've really started to develop our public cloud operating model. Here you can see the primary tenets of this operating model, the first one being education. In addition to that, we have ideas around account structure, common services, and network, which really form this foundational layer for cloud. Then we get into the next layer. We see other details around storage and backup, identity, automation, and enterprise service management, all essential to your cloud journey. And then we get to the layer of operational support, governance, monitoring, security, and cost controls. We're going to be focusing on that last layer, and it's something that we found there is a gap in the marketplace for. A lot of our clients need extra help with managing this layer of the cloud. And the main reason for that is because of the shared responsibility model. So let's jump into that. What's the client role in managing cloud computing workloads? Here we have the AWS Shared Responsibility model. For security and spend in the cloud, it really becomes the client's responsibility, except for those underlying services that AWS is maintaining. Now, this is great for a lot of our clients who've been worried about the data center, worried about switches and backup and disaster recovery. But sometimes people forget that when you move to the cloud, there are a lot of configurations that end up becoming your responsibility. Your customer data, the platform, the OS, encryption, and other configurations are really things that the cloud providers make clear are the responsibility of the customer. AWS defines that as security in the cloud versus security of the cloud. In addition to the security element of this, there are a lot of configurations that become an option for the customer to choose. And that can be overwhelming, especially when cloud is new and people are starting to spin up workloads or rewrite applications. The decisions around what to do with those shared responsibilities is something that we find a lot of clients are having challenges with. Now, this is the same case on the Azure side of the house, and they have a little bit of a different graphic, but it's the same tenet. The responsibility of the client becomes a little bit more than you might expect when you first think about moving to the cloud. So we see a varying degree of responsibility based on SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, and on-prem. Obviously, with an on-prem setup, there's going to be a lot of responsibility of the client. But when we think about the way that this can get out of hand, from an administrator's or an executive sponsor's perspective, there are a lot of opportunities for misconfigurations. The developers become responsible for making some decisions that really can have some large implications for the client environment. For that reason, we really do see a lot of our customers choosing to supplement the information that they get from the native cloud provider with some additional information from third-party tools. Now, there are a lot of native tools that can help you in this shared responsibility, but the expertise for configuring those and making sure that you're certain of the configuration is something where we see a lot of clients having deliberate conversations about how they configure their environment prior to deploy. If you've already deployed your environment, it's also important to have these conversations and make sure the right choices are being made. Now let's jump into some of our approaches and focus areas for today. So one of the main complaints that we hear from customers after they've deployed their cloud environment is that spend is getting out of control. And that's something that there really is an opportunity to control. We see these key challenges when talking with our clients. First, cloud provider offerings are numerous. There are tons of offerings that are out there and tons of configurations you can choose. This takes a lot of time and planning prior to a deploy or after if you've already started your cloud journey. Overall, a cloud cost optimization strategy is something that a lot of our clients haven't chosen to incorporate into their cloud journey. Next, we see a lot of clients that get excited about the idea of moving to the cloud, and they might be overly ambitious about spend commitments, reservations, or other commitments to receive discounts from cloud providers. Sometimes it's better to pay as you go. Next, we see that there is a number of new launches every single day with regards to services that are out there. And there may be some different changes over time on what services you choose for your cloud environment. On top of that, there are a lot of pricing schemes that are out there, and it's hard to navigate those. We also see some skill set shortages. So as we mentioned earlier, there are a lot of challenges with getting those folks who've been working in the traditional data center up to speed with cloud. And finally, and most importantly, we see a lot of clients that don't think about tagging or having visibility into their environment. So let's jump into tagging first. Tagging best practices and guiding principles can provide a great starting point for thinking about your cloud journey. When we work with our customers, we have a lot of conversations about the plans for what they're going to tag and what that's going to look like. This can vary from being a traditional showback or a formal chargeback model where the client is using these tags to actually go and take the information on workloads that are running and bring it back to the right cost center. Here's some tips on using tags. First of all, make sure you're standardized. This can be something that really becomes a challenge over time because our clients really focus on thinking about a tag structure, but if we're not compliant, then we see challenges in that area. Also, consider multiple tagging dimensions. So this could be everything from business unit to individual owner to who deployed the resource. Err on the side of too many tags rather than too few tags. We've seen a lot of clients who don't have enough tags or have untagged resources and can't track back why something was deployed or who it relates to. On top of that, tags can be modified, but sometimes it's hard to retroactively tag depending on the cloud service provider. So if you don't have a tagging strategy, this is something that we really start with when we're talking with clients. Think about the way that you need to visualize the information about what's running in your cloud environment. The tags can be focused on cost, but they can also be focused on the security or sensitivity of data and having an idea of who deployed something inside of the environment. When we look at AWS and Azure, there are some differences in the way that tags are treated, and there needs to be deliberate decisions made around that. Now, it's tough to enforce tagging. In the AWS space, sometimes we've leveraged some Lambda functions or some custom functions to enforce tagging. But even more so than that, we've also found that clients don't have visibility to see what's untagged inside of the environment. A lot of times there's maybe a push and a pull between the financial group and between the cloud stakeholders because there isn't deliberate decisions around how to associate the cost with a specific group. On the Azure side of the house, it's a little bit easier to enforce tagging. So we do see some better compliance based on policies, but it's still a challenge to make sure that everyone's adhering to those policies and make sure that everyone has this buy-in for the idea of tagging. As you go through cost optimization exercises, if you can't identify what's running in your cloud environment, it's going to be really hard to make decisions about what to remove. We think of our cloud cost optimization in two big approaches. We have the traditional approach, which is focused on benchmarking, rationalizing workloads, cost cutting, and workload optimization. And then we have our second bucket, which is governance and the idea of a cloud center of excellence. Many of our clients are using cloud centers of excellence to drive the conversation about how to best use a cloud environment. And it's essential because it bridges a number of groups inside of an organization that often aren't inside of the same organization. This drives conversations around budgeting, financial transparency, chargeback, and overall cloud stewardship. Cloud stewardship is this idea that it's great to be a good cloud user. And we need to get the buy-in from the developers and the larger group of folks inside of your organization to make sure that they're bought into the idea of not overspending in the cloud. Each cloud journey is unique, but at its core, everyone is focused on saving money by going to the cloud. We think that a lot of our clients don't have enough of the conversation up front with their engineers to make decisions and maybe only focus on the traditional approach, benchmarking those apps, making sure that we're optimizing those workloads, and don't focus on some of the larger conversations and the holistic drive to really make sure that the organization understands the desired outcome of the cloud environment. When we think about chargeback is something that really helps to drive compliance, because when something is going to a shared financial bucket, there isn't as much of a pain point with really seeing what the cloud spend is. We've had customers wake up with double-digit increases in spend and call us, and that's how my team has got engaged to take a look at ongoing cost management and alerting and budgeting. But we don't want that to happen. We hope that all of our clients, through the beginning of their cloud journey, can have those conversations early on and avoid waking up to those large cloud bills. So let's talk a little bit about a cost optimization framework that we found is helpful. So if we look on the left-hand side, we see our current state cost drivers. When we drive that information through a data analysis and collection phase, we can then make some decisions about what to do with those costs inside of the cloud environment. Now, this is something that has to be ongoing. So the important thing about developing a Cloud Center of Excellence team or developing a group that's focused on cloud optimization is that this frequency can vary based on the size of your environment, but it's not something that happens every year. A lot of times we're thinking about refresh cycles in a 3-year time frame, maybe an annual budgeting cycle. But when it comes to cloud, it can be something that needs to be looked at possibly even on a daily or monthly or weekly basis, depending on the size of your environment. So if we start at the top, the first thing you want to do is eliminate. Eliminate is something that's really easy to talk about, but it's hard to do. And again, we loop that back to our idea of tagging. When you eliminate a resource, you need to make sure that it's okay that you eliminate that resource. We've gone into client environments and taken a look at things that have been deployed, and we see abandoned resources, abandoned volumes that have never been attached. And this is something that really becomes a quick win for getting savings. Next, you want to simplify, you want to utilize the resources that are deployed, and you want to standardize. When we think about those three together, that's all really focused on thinking about your application and what the requirement is for the cloud provider. Your application can vary in its needs. And if it hasn't been written properly to use the savings opportunities that are available in the cloud, it can be hard. Next, we go down to centralize, leverage those economies of scale. A lot of times when we're thinking about resources or we're thinking about cloud environments, this becomes a main focus. If you're not centralizing the efforts that you have for cloud workloads, then you could be missing out on opportunities. This can go everything from tiered discounts to volume discounts to enterprise agreements or enterprise discounts. There's a lot of economies of scale that you need to think about when you're having conversations about your cloud journey. Next up is automate. Try and eliminate those manual processes. Now, this is a double-edged sword because at a certain time, you can end up with an automation process that is firing off maybe some storage volumes or deploying certain resources that aren't ever used. So make sure that your automation is deliberate and tested before deploying it to your prod environment. Finally, we have our renegotiate. Make sure you balance the portfolio and minimize that impact. So think about what's running in your cloud environment. Think about the applications that can be sunset. Think about the applications that are not needed for the organization anymore. A lot of times, cloud ends up being set it and forget it. And we have an opportunity to really go through this data collection and analysis to figure out how you can optimize costs. When we work with clients on my team under CoPilot, we're actually looking at doing this on a monthly basis at minimum. Some of our clients have us reporting on a weekly basis to make sure that things are headed in the right direction. But the last thing that we need is a client getting a bill at the end of a month and they're not realizing the actual budgeted amount or what the spend was inside of the cloud environment. So if we distill it down to some 11 principles here, these are the real big factors that you want to educate on and monitor when we're thinking about cost optimization inside of the cloud. First, choose the appropriate instance types and size. Make sure that you're using the right resources for the right workload. The developers may have made a choice and you may need to revisit that down the line to make sure that that CPU utilization is something that's actually being used. Managed reserved instances and savings plans becomes a really important conversation. Make sure those reservations for workloads make sense and that coverage is up to the threshold that you're comfortable with. We've seen some customers who understand that there's a baseline cloud spend that they're going to have or a set of workloads that are running. We've seen other clients who want to cover the entire workload with reservations or other cost savings purchases inside of the cloud environment. Scale and schedule instances is something that sounds pretty basic, but again, if you're not leveraging this, you're not getting the whole savings that you could have from the cloud. There could be workloads that you could be turning off overnight. And especially when you think about staging environments or development environments, there's a chance that those workloads could be automated to turn down and spin down so that you're saving money in the cloud environment. Spot instances and batch processing across all the cloud providers becomes an option, but it's not something that's easy to leverage. If you're able to use that to process data asynchronously, it's something that can really be helpful. Also, try and use those cloud native patterns. Make sure that you're thinking cloud first, and that as you bring more applications to your cloud environment, that you're bringing the idea of how this fits in the cloud, possibly changing the entire architecture. Consolidate and leverage shared services inside of your cloud accounts. So that can be everything from having a conversation about account structures to making some deliberate decisions about where you can eliminate redundancy in workloads that are running. Minimize cross-boundary networking. This is pretty obvious. If you can route it internally and save some money, it's a great opportunity to make sure that you are not paying in and out when you could just be routing internally inside of the cloud provider. Resource lifecycles and auto tier storage are also great opportunities. You can really make sure that access to data is active, that you can see that information, but if it's not something that's being frequently used, you can change that. You can also replace licensed software with open source options. As you see the marketplaces that are out there, there's opportunities to really drive conversations about how you can save money in licensing. Number 10, as we get to the end of this list here, is to evaluate alternative clouds. Multi-cloud isn't always the right strategy, but there could be certain workloads that end up costing less in certain cloud environments. And finally, negotiate those enterprise discounts. We talked a little bit earlier about overcommitting, but make sure that if you are running inside of the cloud environment and you have a run rate that puts you in the category of folks who do deserve to get to that point where they're having a conversation with a cloud provider around discounts, that you're having that conversation. So now we're going to move on to our next focus area, which is security of your cloud environment. So again, when we see the headlines, a lot of times the misconfigurations of a cloud environment are something that's getting to the front page of a newspaper. We've all seen the buckets of the storage that's been misconfigured, and there have been a lot of improvements by the cloud provider to make sure that you can secure your environment more easily. But in the end, the shared responsibility model really does make this your responsibility. When we think about cloud security design, there are 5 main buckets that we think about. First is identity and access management, then threat detection, infrastructure security and automation, data protection, and incident response. This is all a part of thinking about your holistic approach to cloud. Now, chances are you already have some of these items checked off in your on-prem environment, or if you're already in the cloud, you've thought or cobbled together a solution to handle these. But think about this a little bit more holistically is really important as you ensure that your environment is structured and it's strong. When you bring more and more applications to the cloud, you can see that there's an opportunity to really make sure that your infrastructure security in the cloud is treated just as seriously as your infrastructure security inside of the data center. Now, a lot of the changes with the shared responsibility model are great. You don't have to worry about physical security of your data center. You don't have to worry about access controls, but you do have to worry about different things that are out there, including the ability to really delegate permissions and control what's going on. So let's talk about our key challenges for our client base. One of the first ones and one of the most obvious ones is that inventory visibility is hard. You really need to know what is running in your cloud environment. And that's sometimes tough to see across all the regions that are out there and possibly across multiple cloud providers. Governance is also difficult to enforce. We really work with our customers to make sure that they're thinking about ways that they can automate the governance inside of the cloud environment, but more importantly, that they just have visibility. Misguided deployments can really lead to large risks. As we drive the conversation about automation, the chances that a template has a misconfiguration that's repeated time and time again really becomes a challenge for our client base. We want to make sure that we're catching those before it's deployed, but also on the off chance that something poor is written into a template, that we're seeing that and bubbling that up to the Cloud Center of Excellence or the other security stakeholders. New services, again, provide this challenge. How are we going to use that service? How are we going to configure it? And what controls do we want to put in place? Or is it a service that we want to block our client users, our customers for the cloud environment from using? Multiple admins is also a little bit of a risky scenario. So thinking deliberately about your design for administration of the environment is also important. Again, we have these challenges of not seeing what's deployed via a template. An app team could have access to the environment and there could be no review process. So there could be violations of compliance requirements because of the way that the deployment process is structured. While it's great to build these into CI/CD pipelines, oftentimes that's a future state for our clients. And there's some early stages of cloud application migration that requires a little bit of a manual check on what's going on. And again, we see those same challenges with skill set shortages, with the need for tools and bandwidth to manage the security of the cloud environment. These all are really what we see our clients thinking about and worrying about as they think about cloud security. Now, the cloud providers have a lot of services that they offer that end up falling into the security bucket. So focusing on AWS and Azure today, we see our identity and access management grouping, our threat detection, and then on the right-hand side, we have to think a little bit more deliberately about how these all fit into incident response. Now, mapping this can be something that becomes challenging. And when you have a multi-cloud deployment, it can be tough to really think about this. And again, it's focused a little bit more on visibility. What's running inside of the cloud environment? So while all of these tools foundationally give us great working blocks to build out a controlled cloud environment, they also, again, require configurations and deliberate decisions around design patterns. So when we think about some of the things that are here, how has your organization thought about these? Are they something that they've thought about already? Or is there some gap here where you've chosen to use a third-party tool, or you've not really figured out the way that you want to use these cloud security tools from the native providers? And again, we can talk a little bit more about data protection and infrastructure security. There's a lot out there. And the care and feeding and configuration and fitting all these together as your dynamic needs change is something that we found our clients really are facing a challenge with. So another driving factor in thinking about cloud is the cloud framework that you may use, whether it's a compliance framework or whether it's a best practices framework, to make a baseline for your cloud environment. A lot of our clients start with CIS foundations. The CIS foundations benchmarks are a great starting point to think about what's running inside of your environment and whether or not you've securely configured the environment. From there, you can build on a number of other frameworks. These are a listing of some of the frameworks that we help our clients to navigate. And we think that there is a lot of value in picking a framework to drive your compliance. That's even if you don't have a formal compliance requirement or have restrictions on the workloads that are running inside of the environment. If you take the CIS foundations and overlay them with your current IT security practices, chances are you're going to end up with a pretty comprehensive grouping of rules and regulations on how you are going to run your cloud environment. And the great thing about leveraging a third-party tool, if you choose to do that, is that you can take this framework and you can impose it on the entire environment to make sure that there's compliance. Again, when you're thinking about the CCOE or who's worrying about security of the cloud, you want to make sure that you really have a good handle on what the baseline is for your organization. So we've worked a lot with clients to make sure that we take one baseline and apply it to all of the applications and workloads that are running inside of the environment. And then from there, if there's specific use cases, something like HIPAA data or PCI DSS, depending on if that's structured in a separate account or if it's a specific workload that's running, we can target checks on that specific environment. So thinking about our security factors in the cloud, first, control access. Make sure that you have a good handle on who's accessing your cloud environment. In AWS and Azure, there's a lot of granularity and permissions, but make sure that you have control over those master accounts, over that primary access key that you can use to get into the environment. Choose appropriate access permissions for those individual users. This is pretty basic in IT security, but we want to make sure that we're applying the same threshold for cloud accounts. A lot of times when there's an account that's been created as a test or as a pilot initially, there isn't the exercise to go back and take a look at those accounts and decisions that were made. Make sure you're managing access in a programmatic manner. This is pretty standard, but if you're accessing, leverage APIs, leverage secrets and keys. Define an approach for threat detection. So where are those alerts going? Are they going to an existing team or group? Are they going to the Cloud Center of Excellence group or a distribution list? Who's thinking about the threats that are identified inside of the cloud? Use a data classification approach to control risk. Just make sure that you're thinking about what's inside of your cloud environment and define those incident response runbooks. We want to make sure that you're thinking about what to do if something does go wrong and that folks have a good handle on what they can do to control an issue that's happening inside of the cloud. Finally, we're getting to a little bit more of the leveraging third-party tooling. I know I've mentioned this a couple of times, and we've seen it be very helpful and successful with leveraging these third-party tools to validate the configuration of the environment. This is something that I'm going to jump into a little bit more later on when we talk about the CoPilot offering. Resource deployment can be streamlined through templates. Again, it reduces the risk of having an error. Make sure that you do have that alerting and reporting deployed to the environment, that you're looking at the security and the configuration of cloud on an ongoing basis, and then make sure that approvals are really something that is defined and that no one is doing something outside of the standard processes that you've decided on for your cloud environment. And then finally, consider cross-cloud security visibility. So if you have one security group that's taking a look at the cloud environment, make sure that they can see into every cloud environment and every cloud account. So now let's talk a little bit about CoPilot. CoPilot is a solution that we developed at AHEAD to specifically address the day two operational challenges that we've been talking about today. We saw that a lot of our clients were deploying to the cloud, and then the question was, what now? So we wanted to put together an offering that combines third-party, open source, and cloud provider native tooling to give you a one-stop shop to get visibility into your cloud environment and to also get help in making decisions about what you're doing in the cloud, along with hands-on work. When we think about our cloud approach and the way that we handle ongoing optimization, this is our workflow. So up at the top, we start with our onboarding process. Then once we get to that green, we consider the client CoPilot enabled. Then we move on to our remediation phase. So this would be a client who's already running inside of the cloud environment. We have our rapid remediation steps for key issues. Then we prioritize and deal with our secondary remediation, followed by cost optimization. And by then, we got our client to a cloud desired state, and we have this streamlined cloud running. But we find that our client still needs the alerting, dashboards, reporting, and backlog support to make sure that the environment is running efficiently. So created this feedback loop for your streamlined cloud where you're able to see into the cloud environment, and we're able to help you on that monthly or quarterly basis, review what's going on inside of the cloud, and make sure that you have an idea of what you want to address or what you want to change. It really is all about a continuous analysis of existing workloads and infrastructure. So we're not focused on deploying workloads or migrating workloads. Instead, we're focused on those cloud workloads that are already running. We collect information using that tooling that I referenced, which we're going to take a look at in a little bit. And then the team is analyzing that information, providing you with recommendations, and then through enablement hours to complete hands-on tasks, we want to go ahead and remediate. So this can be everything from taking a look at IAM policies to going out there and taking a look at what's in your blob storage and making sure that it's information that's been accessed recently and that we don't need to change the configuration there. It can be all kinds of activities that end up being the care and feeding of your cloud environment. So we're there to be extra hands on deck and help you in your cloud journey. We're also there to be your experts that you can phone whenever you need help. So CoPilot really ends up providing tooling, engineering, and optimization to give you this outcome of having access to experts, being able to get assistance with enforcing best practices and compliance inside of the environment, and get you the details you need to have a handle on what's going on inside of your cloud environment. We also provide cloud billing services so that we can consolidate your Azure and AWS consumption along with your CoPilot services and get one bill from ahead. We've seen a lot of success with working with customers and providing them day two support because we know that this is an area where we see lots of customers facing the same challenges and wanted to come to market with an offering that really could help to support you. So now let's take a look at the CoPilot platform and talk a little bit about how our clients are supported in their cloud journey. Here we have the CoPilot portal, which is a starting point for our clients. When a client logs in, they see 4 tiles, and they're able to click around to have an idea of what's running inside of their cloud environment. When we think about where clients start, oftentimes they're starting in our service portal. Service portal is going to give them access to the tickets and the incidents that have been generated from their cloud environment. It's going to thread together details around what they've requested from the team, and they're going to be able to see updates on the hours that they have remaining, create a ticket, look at the status page, and see tickets that are open here. So we have a sample ticket in here, a workspaces cleanup script. So we wanted to help a client specifically with cleaning up their workspaces environment. And it was something where we created some automation to handle that task. So this is something where the client would hop in here, present us with a problem, and then my team would go ahead and hop on that ticket and start to address the issue. So it's a pretty standard portal, but it gives clients the ability to really have a good idea of what's running inside of their cloud environment and have a good idea of what we can help them with. We look at the status page. This is where we can see those open incidents. So if there's something going on, we can aggregate those alerts and show them directly to the customer along with those support tickets that they can request. So we also have our ChatOps portal. ChatOps is a dedicated channel where you can chat with the CoPilot team. So it's really meant to grab those requests that are a little bit smaller, maybe some quick clarification, but not something that is as big as a ticket. So I won't demo that right now, but it's a great channel where you can hop in and chat with our group of engineers and get details on the support that you need. Now let's hop into our tooling. Like I mentioned, we leverage third-party open source and native tooling so we can get a full view of what's going on inside of your environment. So right now we're going to hop into a demo environment to have a look at the specific cost and inventory tooling. So when we get into the tool, the first thing that we see our tabs for the cloud provider. So we have AWS and Azure and Google as well, which is going to be launching later this year. Right now, we're looking at the multi-account view. The multi-account view is something where we can go in there and take a number of cloud accounts, combine them all together to provide our clients with one view of what's running inside of their environment. So on the back end, it doesn't really matter what the account structure is. We can take all that information, sum it up, and provide it directly to you. So we have our Wayne Enterprises demo account here, and then we also have our Ahead Lab. So let's hop into the tool and learn a little bit more about the type of information that you're going to be provided if you were to use the CoPilot solution. Our starting point is going to be best practices checks. So these checks take information pulled down from the cloud native provider APIs, and they provide you with recommendations. So this can be everything from security to cost to availability and usage. These checks really are meant to drive good hygiene in your cloud environment. They're a baseline to start you down a great cloud path. So if we look at some of the idle EC2 instances in this cost tab, we can see some details about what's running inside of the environment. Now, if we go to our savings tab, we can actually see a summarized report that tells us the possible savings that are available to us. So we can see $1,000 in possible savings, and all that is based on just giving you details around what's running inside of the environment. So we can see some unattached EBS volume, some unused elastic load balancers, and if we hop into these, we can actually see additional details about what's running. So this is running in our sandbox account, so we can see that there's quite a bit of opportunity for cost savings. Now, in addition, on our left navigation pane, we also see some additional details around cost. When we go into the billing information, we can see some summary reporting along with some custom reporting. When we think about custom reporting, one of the most powerful tools is advanced grouping. A lot of our clients in both AWS and Azure are challenged with really getting details about what's running inside of the cloud environment. Our CoPilot tool is grabbing that data and helping to surface it in a much more accessible way. So right now I'm going to load up one of my save filters in this advanced grouping window. This save filter is going to allow us to change the date as well as change the grouping into artificial groups that aren't related to the underlying billing data from AWS or Azure. So in this case, I'm looking at AWS account, then created by, which is a tag key that we use to track who is using a specific resource or creating a resource, and then by service. When I go down to filter, I can change all this information to really hone in. Maybe I'm doing a region report or on a specific account. And then when I filter this information down, I can go ahead and wait for the report to come back and show me the details. So this report is actually showing us details around the roles and who created this role so that we can have a good handle on what's running inside of the cloud environment. Now, there are a variety of ways that we can actually group by, and this dynamic interface is something that's really helpful when we're thinking about making sure that we get the right information to the right folks. We've seen a lot of value in using the platform by IT finance folks who might not be able to access the native cloud provider portal or might not feel comfortable with it. And we've seen a lot of opportunities for automation to save time for our clients. We've taken some of our clients' chargeback reporting that was taking them 5+ hours a month to do pivot tables and chargeback, and we've automated that to have reports come directly to the inbox. In addition, we do have some utilization reporting. So right-sizing recommendations are something that's always a challenge to keep up with. And again, on the back end, this is summarizing data that's coming from a number of sources. And if we scroll down, we can see instance details. But the big thing here is we see a summary level information where we see the number of instances, the current hourly cost, and the projected hourly cost. So we see a $1 hourly savings, which can add up, especially if this were a prod environment instead of our lab environment. So there are a number of features and functionality here that are all intended to really help you to make sure that you have a good handle on the cost and inventory of your cloud. Now let's hop into another tool that's a little bit more focused on security and compliance. So we're logging into the home dashboard here of a tool called Dome9 that we leverage. And this actually has connections up to the environment where we are seeing 6 AWS accounts and 4 Azure accounts that are connected up, along with 1,671 protected assets. We see a lot of detail here around what's going on inside of the cloud environment. And there's an ability to really configure this to make the dashboard show you the information that's relevant to you. One of the most powerful things about the platform is this idea of a compliance rule set. So we talked a lot about the CIS benchmarks as being something that's really helpful in starting your cloud journey. And here we have some pre-configured bundles that are able to help you to drive that conversation. The cool thing about this tool is, again, it's agentless. It's going out there and pulling down data from the cloud provider and then making sure that it passes the rule that's a part of this GSL. So if we look at the GSL, we can see the detail of what's actually being checked. So when the tool goes out and pulls down that data, it's bringing it back into the tool and then evaluating it against these rules. Traditionally, we help our clients to talk through what rule set makes the most sense. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes it's something where we create a custom rule set. So the cool thing about that is that if we go into the GSL builder here for AWS and Azure, we can go ahead and build any number of rules based on these entities that are ingested. So every time we're going out there and pulling down cloud provider data, we're able to make sure that we're pulling the right data and making the right checks. We've used this for everything from a region enforcement engine to a tag enforcement engine to alert folks on when something's going wrong inside of the cloud environment. There's a number of other features and functionality regarding network security, but a lot of times when we're thinking about security opportunities, we think about bringing in a third-party tool like this specifically to make sure that we're reassured that the environment is properly configured. This type of tool would catch those violations and push that alert back over to that ServiceNow incident table that we looked at a few minutes ago so that you can have visibility into what's going on inside of your cloud environment. I'm always happy to talk about the environment and talk a little bit more about the tool. But for now, let's pass it over to our Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat window and we will go from there. So we had a few questions that came in here about the recording and slides. So just a heads up that you will be receiving a recording link where you can review. Unfortunately, we won't be able to send out the entire slide deck here, but that should be something that's coming to the inbox. So just wanted to address that housekeeping item here before we jump into the Q&As. All right, we have a couple questions in here and only have some time to answer two. So the first one that I see here is a question around the average savings that we're seeing inside of client environments. So this is a question that a lot of people ask us, and really it focuses a little bit more on what you see inside of your environment in terms of workloads. So if you have no optimization efforts inside of the environment right now, we would generally tend to see folks seeing savings of around 10 to 15%, and that's excluding taking into consideration the possibility for using reservations or savings plans. So chances are, if you already have some optimization going on, there's more savings to be harvested. But if you have nothing going on inside of the environment, as a general rule, we're seeing around 10 to 15% in savings across cloud environments, sometimes more than that as well. We did have one question about, is CoPilot based on CloudCheckr? So there is some underlying tools that power our platform, and CloudCheckr is one of them, but we have a number of other tools that we also can use based on individual use cases. We also have some third-party tooling that we've stitched together on the back end to deal with our alerting. So the different sources of information, whether it's a third-party tool or whether it's a native provider tooling information, that information actually will sum up and go into our ServiceNow instance, which we can go ahead and e-bond across. So it's a combination of third-party, open source, and native tooling as well. And then the last question that we have here was just around compliance. I know there are a few other questions that have been popping in. We will definitely follow up with you offline on those. So we do have the ability to create custom checks, as I mentioned here. As a general rule, what we're doing with our clients there is sitting down with the stakeholders that are focused on compliance and governance, and really mapping out some of those custom checks that they have. So that would be something that we actually can push into a SIM that you may be using, or push into a ServiceNow instance or another platform so that you can actually have details around that environment. So those questions that I didn't get to, we'll be following up with you. And as I mentioned, the recording is going to be shared out here via email. So next up, we're going to pass it over to David for some information on our Q&A with the client panel. So I'll pass it over to David Williams now.
Well, thank you, Ben.